I found the first one in a small town museum in Ohio, just sitting there, a photograph from 1884 showing what the placard called local lumber workers, except one of them wasn't local, and he wasn't human-sized. The man in the center stands a full head and shoulders above the others, not slightly taller, dramatically taller. His hand rests on a beam that comes up to the other men's chests. The proportions are mathematically impossible if he's normal height, which means he's not. He's 9 feet tall, maybe more, and nobody thought this was worth explaining. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I found 273 more photographs just like it, all from the same period, all showing the same thing, all filed away in local archives and historical societies with labels like construction crew, or government workers, or town officials, never mentioning the one detail that should be the only detail anyone talks about. They were giants, real, documented, photographed giants, working regular jobs, living in normal society, existing in numbers large enough that they appear in hundreds of photographs across 4 continents. And then they vanished. Not died off, not gradually decreased, vanished. The photographs stop in 1897, completely, as if someone flipped a switch, and they all disappeared overnight. But here's what they left behind. And this is where it gets disturbing. The buildings, the massive, inexplicable buildings we've been walking through our entire lives, without questioning why they're built the way they are. I'm talking about every courthouse in America built between 1850 and 1900. I'm talking about government buildings in Europe with 12-foot doors in the basement hallways. I'm talking about thousands of structures with architectural features that make absolutely no sense for human beings of normal size. Unless they weren't built for us. Go to your local courthouse. If it was built in the 1800s, walk inside and actually look at the proportions. The door handles are at chest height. The windows start 7 feet up the wall. The staircases have steps so tall you have to consciously lift your leg to climb them. We've been told this is grand architecture, that it was designed to inspire and intimidate. But why would you make the back hallways grand? Why would you make the service corridors intimidating? Why would you make the clerk's office impossible to work in comfortably if you're under 6.5 feet tall? You wouldn't, unless the clerks weren't under 6.5 feet tall. Here's what I found in the archives that made my blood run cold. There's a city in Montana, population 14,000 in 1890. The municipal records show they employed 47 people in city government, standard stuff, clerks, administrators, building inspectors, public works. But the payroll shows something else. 53 salaries, 6 more than the official count. The 6 extra salaries aren't labelled with names. They're labelled with a job title, height staff, not high staff like senior positions. Height, as in vertical measurement, and those 6 positions were paid more than the mayor. I found the same thing in 12 other cities, different labels. Elevation personnel, overseer class, structural administration, always unlisted in the official employee count, always paid at the top of the scale, always appearing in cities with major construction projects happening during that exact period. Now look at what those cities built. Look at the scale of it. Look at the timeline. The Chicago Board of Trade building started 1882, completed 1885. 3 years to build a structure that modern engineers say should have taken 6 years with the technology supposedly available. How? The records show a workforce of 200 men. Not 400, not 600, 200. Plus these mysterious elevation personnel paid premium wages, unless those personnel weren't just watching, unless they were doing work that made the impossible possible. This is what they don't want you to connect. The photographs, the buildings, the payroll records, the construction timelines, the sudden appearance of structures that shouldn't have been possible, the sudden disappearance of the only people capable of building them, and then there's Tartaria. Oh, you've heard it's a conspiracy theory, you've heard it's debunked, you've heard it's internet nonsense for people who don't understand history, except it's on the maps, it's in the encyclopedias, it's in official records from every major European power spanning 200 years. Tartaria, a massive empire covering most of Asia, appearing in French atlases, British educational materials, Russian geographic surveys, German encyclopedias, not as myth, not as legend, as documented political reality, and then in 1850 it starts disappearing from the maps. By 1865 it's gone completely, not conquered by another power, not renamed, just removed. As if someone went through every library in the Western world and systematically deleted it from the record, which is exactly what happened. The British Library has catalogue records for 17 encyclopedias published between 1820 and 1850 that contain entries for Tartaria. They have 12 of those encyclopedias in their collection, 5 are missing. But the catalogue cards remain. Someone checked them out and never returned them, all 5. Different years, different publishers, all containing detailed information about Tartarian geography, government, and society. And here's what makes it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The 5 missing encyclopedias are the only ones that contain maps showing Tartarian city layouts. The 12 remaining show the borders, show the territory, but no internal detail, no cities, no infrastructure. Someone specifically removed every source that showed what Tartaria actually looked like inside its borders. Now look at what appears in western cities immediately after Tartaria disappears from the maps. The giants appear in photographs starting in 1856. The massive construction projects begin in 1860. The unexplained civic architecture spreads across America and Europe throughout the 1870s and 1880s, and all of it stops in 1897. The photographs stop, the giants vanish from the record, the construction techniques that seemed impossible suddenly become impossible again. Engineering projects that were completed in 3 years start taking 6 years. Building methods that worked perfectly for 40 years are suddenly abandoned, as if someone shut down the program. I found a letter in a private collection in Boston, written in 1902 by a city planner to a colleague. He's complaining about the difficulty of renovating a government building built in 1875. He writes, "The proportions are entirely wrong for modern use. The previous administration must have employed unusual personnel to function in these spaces. The doorways alone require modification, as do the desk heights and corridor dimensions. One wonders what manner of individuals necessitated such scale. One wonders. Except he knew. They all knew." The letter is from 1902. 20 years isn't long enough to forget. The people who worked in these buildings when they were first built were still alive. The construction crews were still alive. The photographs existed. The employment records existed. But by 1902, it had become something you didn't mention directly, something you wondered about in private letters, something that had already started becoming unspeakable. There's a cemetery in Pennsylvania, small town, population 3,000. The cemetery records from 1870 to 1895 show 237 burials. 21 of those graves are marked unusual interment. That's the official designation in the ledger, unusual interment. The graves are 12 feet long, standard graves are 8 feet, these are 12 feet, and they're not marked with names, they're marked with numbers, as if the people buried there weren't supposed to be remembered as individuals. I found 16 more cemeteries with the same notation, different states, different regions, all showing these unusual interments between 1870 and 1900. All 12 feet long, all marked with numbers instead of names, and then in 1900 they stop. No more unusual interments, ever again. What happened? Where did they go? Not died off naturally because the graves stop appearing. Not emigrated because they stop appearing in every country simultaneously. Not integrated because someone went to great lengths to erase them from official memory. They were removed, systematically, deliberately, by someone with the authority to make it happen across national borders. Here's what I think happened, and I'm basing this on the evidence, not speculation. Tartaria was real, it was advanced, it employed a population of physically larger humans in specific administrative and construction roles. When it collapsed, or was conquered, or was absorbed by expanding Western powers, those individuals were integrated into Western societies. They were valuable. They could do work normal humans couldn't do. They could oversee projects normal humans couldn't oversee. They were paid accordingly and employed accordingly. For 40 years, this was normal. Documented, photographed, unremarkable, and then someone decided it needed to stop being normal. Not because they died, not because they left, but because their existence proved something about recent history that contradicted the narrative being constructed. If giants were real, Tartaria was real. If Tartaria was real, the official history of Asia was wrong. If the official history was wrong, someone was lying about what really happened in the 1800s. So the giants had to go. The photographs had to be filed away and forgotten. The buildings had to be re-explained as aesthetic choices. The employment records had to be dismissed as clerical errors. The payroll anomalies had to be ignored. And it worked. For 100 years, it worked. Between 1880 and 1920, newspapers across America reported discoveries of giant skeletons. Regularly, the New York Times ran at least 18 articles. Regional papers hundreds more. 7-foot skeletons in burial mounds. 8-foot remains in construction excavations. 9-foot skeletons discovered during railroad projects, all documented, all photographed in many cases. all sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further study and preservation. The Smithsonian's official position today? Those skeletons never existed. They claim no such specimens were ever in their collection. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. The response took 11 months. When it finally came, it stated that no such specimens had ever been catalogued in their collections. No record of receipt, no documentation of study, no transfer records showing where they might have gone. But the newspaper articles exist, the shipping manifests exist, letters from local historical societies confirming they sent specimens to the Smithsonian exist. Someone received those skeletons, someone signed for them, someone made them disappear, and here's what makes it impossible to dismiss. The pattern of discoveries matches the pattern of giant sightings in photographs. Most skeleton discoveries, 1870 to 1895. Most giant photographs, 1856 to 1897. Most unusual cemetery interments, 1870 to 1900. All the same timeline, all stopping at the same moment in history. Now let me show you something that connects it all. I found a document, a single page in a collection of personal papers donated to a university archive in Massachusetts, written in 1903 by a man who worked as a records clerk for the Department of the Interior. He's writing to his brother, and he mentions almost casually that his department had recently been instructed to reclassify certain personnel records from the previous administration. The specific instruction? Remove physical description fields from employment documentation dating between 1860 and 1900. Height, weight, identifying characteristics, all to be deleted from official personnel files. The reason given? Standardization of record-keeping practices. Except they didn't delete the whole records, just the physical descriptions, just the data that would have documented how tall these employees actually were. This wasn't one department in one city, this was federal. This was a coordinated effort across the entire government bureaucracy to erase specific information from specific time periods, and it worked. Go try to find employment records from the 1870s that include height data. They don't exist. Not in government archives, not in municipal collections, not anywhere. But records from the 1850s, they include height. Records from the 1910s, they include height. Just that specific 40-year window where the giants appear in photographs, the exact period gets scrubbed. Then there are the tools. I started finding them in estate sales about 3 years ago. Wrenches. Massive wrenches. Working tools with wear patterns and grip marks. The first one I found weighs 47 pounds. The handle is 3 feet long. The jaw opens to 8 inches. It's designed for a hand twice the size of a normal human hand. Working tools with wear patterns and grip marks. I've found 11 more since then, all from estate sales of homes built in the 1880s, all showing evidence of actual use, all impossibly large for normal human operation. Museums classify them as industrial equipment, but they can't explain what industrial process in the 1880s required hand tools of this scale. These are hand tools. Someone had to hold them, someone had to use them, someone with hands the size of dinner plates. And it's not just wrenches. I found hammers with handles 4 feet long, saws with grips that don't fit normal hands, measuring tools calibrated in ways that only make sense if the person using them had an arm span of 12 feet, all from the same period, all showing the same pattern, all dismissed as curiosities or misidentified by people who can't explain why they exist. The architectural evidence goes deeper than just doorways and ceilings. There's a specific type of stone cutting that appears in buildings from this period. Precision fitting, blocks weighing multiple tons positioned with gaps of less than a millimeter. No mortar, just perfect stone-on-stone contact. Modern stonemasons look at this work and can't explain how it was done. The tools required don't exist in the historical record. The techniques aren't documented anywhere. The precision exceeds what even current technology can easily achieve. But if you assume the workers had strength-to-weight ratios triple that of normal humans, the mystery disappears. The technique becomes possible. Difficult, yes, but possible. You don't need unknown technology. You don't need aliens. You just need workers who can manipulate 400-pound stones the way normal humans manipulate 100-pound stones. And suddenly, buildings that seemed impossible become merely impressive. Here's what really haunts me. The timeline of erasure is so precise it can't be accidental. 1897. Last confirmed photographs of giants in working contexts. 1900. Last unusual cemetery interments. 1903. Federal instruction to remove height data from employment records. 1910. Last newspaper reports of giant skeleton discoveries. 1920. Smithsonian claims no such specimens ever existed. 23 years. That's how long it took to erase them completely from public consciousness. 1 generation. Just long enough that the people who remembered working alongside them were too old to be credible or had died. By 1925, you could mention giants and people would think you were talking about mythology, about ancient legends, not about documented workers who were photographed doing construction jobs 40 years earlier. The cultural memory was severed that quickly, that completely, and the method was brilliant. They didn't destroy the evidence, they fragmented it. The photographs exist, but they're filed as occupational curiosities. The furniture exists, but it's labelled decorative excess. The buildings exist, but they're explained as grand architecture. The cemetery records exist, but they're classified as clerical errors. The employment records exist, but the height data is missing. The newspaper articles exist, but the specimens they describe don't. Every piece of evidence is preserved but isolated, catalogued but never connected. Available but invisible, unless you know to look for the pattern. I started mapping giant-related evidence geographically, photographs, unusual interments, oversized architecture, tool findings, employment anomalies. They cluster. Specifically, they cluster along transportation routes, railroad lines, major rivers, shipping corridors, and they cluster in cities that experienced rapid expansion between 1860 and 1895, cities that built massive civic infrastructure during that exact period. Cities that needed the kind of labour force capable of achieving what the historical record says happened. It's not random, it's not scattered across the country evenly. It follows the pattern of industrial expansion and infrastructure development. These individuals weren't living in isolated communities, they were integrated into the labour economy. They went where the work was, they were employed where their capabilities were needed, they were part of the system, until the system decided they needed to not be part of the historical record. There's one more thing. And this is what convinced me this goes beyond simple historical oversight. I found references to a specific legal classification. It appears in legal records from several states between 1875 and 1900. Persons of exceptional stature, that's the exact phrase. It appears in employment law discussions, in workplace safety regulations, in compensation guidelines. These were actual legal classifications for actual workers who existed in sufficient numbers that labour law needed to account for them. And then the category disappears. It just stops appearing in legal documents after 1900. As if the classification was no longer needed because the people it described were no longer there. I'll leave you with this. There's a building in your city. If you live somewhere with 19th century architecture, there's a building near you right now that has these proportions. Doors too tall, ceilings too high, stairs too steep. Go look at it. Actually measure it. Compare it to modern buildings. And then ask yourself, who was this built for? Because it wasn't built for you. The evidence is everywhere. The photographs, the furniture, the tools, the buildings, the cemetery records, the employment documentation, the newspaper articles, the legal classifications. All of it exists. All of it is accessible. All of it points to the same conclusion. Giants were real. They worked in our cities. They built our infrastructure. They were documented, photographed, employed, and paid. And then they were erased from memory. The buildings remember, even if we've been taught to forget. And now you know what to look for. Now you can see what's been hiding in plain sight for over a century. The question isn't whether they existed. The question is, what else have we been taught to forget?